welcome back to the Authentic Bitches podcast. My name is Brenna, for those of you who don't know me, and I am so excited because today I have my dear friend Rylie here today, who is a reflector. And for those of you who don't know what that means that she is is the rarest energy type in human design, making up only 1% of the population. So we've been riffing on a lot of fun reflector stuff in preparation or for the last 20 minutes, I should say, in preparation for this episode, and pretty much for the duration of us knowing each other, because we met through our friend Bobby, who put us together for a reading, and she was the first official reflector that I'd given a reading for. So it was a pleasure, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I am Rylie. I'm a reflector, and I learned that when I got a reading with Brenna through Bobby, which was one of the best things I've ever done. So, listener, if you haven't gotten a reading with Brenna yet, please go get one. And Brenna has taught me a lot about what being a reflector means, and it's been a really great conversation that we've continued to have over the past year.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so excited because I feel like it's so important where like the more that because like if you read the very beginning of the human design book, it's like always calls it the human design experiment, and it's like peppered throughout. And I feel like in this, and we'll get into this, but like in talking about our reflectorness, and we're going to cover identity, what the struggles and the benefits are from trying to find identity as a reflector, because you have all open energy centers, right? So it's like there's no definition or that like kind of innate more obvious sense of self that I feel like the generators or manifesting generators like myself of the world tend to have, manifestors included, and some projectors kind of peppered throughout it as well. But yeah, so it's definitely, I'm trying to think of what I was going to say, because I'll lose my train of thought too. I'll edit out like later. But I think just with having that sense of openness, it's like comes with the sense of freedom. And I always like to like touch back with you to hear like, how
Yeah.
are you? Like I can experiment through you as being a reflector. Because you're saying, in preparation, like I can know from like data or like intellectualized standpoint of what a reflector means, but like I'll never actually know what that feels like. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what your like personal experience has been like as a reflector, like how you can see how that's like kind of progressed throughout your life, and from not knowing to knowing, and then like experimenting with it, what that process has been like. And we can start off with some of like the struggles that you've had
Yeah.
up until this point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think being a reflector in a world that's probably more catered toward manifesting generators can be pretty difficult. I think there's a lot of tendency for reflectors, because we're so open and we're social chameleons. We can put ourselves into the box that's provided for us. Um, and then we can shift out of that box into a different box with a different group and just keep on shifting. But in that shifting, the constant changing and conforming, we're really just performing ourself. We're not actually being true to all of our parts at one time. We might be focused on, okay, this is my work self, and this is my productive self, but then this is my friend group self with this friend. And it can start to kind of fracture ourselves, and there's not a whole lot of sense of wholeness, which I think adds to the struggle of like, who am I if you're constantly changing? And everyone does this to like an extent. We all are a different person at work than we are with friends, etc. But I think for a reflector, the big part is when we're changing ourselves, we almost can't see like the other parts of ourselves, or we don't know how to integrate all of them at one time. We don't know how to be the work self and still be the other self, and accept that all of those are us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, like being a sum of all of your parts, you're like, but I don't even know what all of those parts are. And then like, do I even like the parts that I had? Do I want to
Yeah.
keep certain parts? Like, because I feel like for you, if you think of that archetype of the chameleon, like you said, right, it's like that shedding of the exoskeleton, where it's like it's still you, but it's like an old layer of the self that like doesn't exist almost anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were to describe like what like shifting feels like for you, what is that kind of like shifting feeling? Like, how does that work for you?
Mm. That's a good question. I feel like it's almost at this point in my life automatic. There's very much a quick read of the energy. And this comes from, I'm also psych background and very interested in studying like people and how they act, and an Aquarius moon in astrology. So that's part of it. But it's this quick read of the room. You know what the energy is, and you can kind of get a a vibe of what's expected of you. And then there's this matching the energy around you. So while there's this performative like sense of self happening in these different areas, you're performing based off other people's expectations, um, which is again very challenging for like then you kind of feel fake almost, even though it a lot of times it is a true piece of yourself. There's almost this like feeling of inauthenticity that comes with it.
Yeah, it's like because it's almost like with studying the psych too, it's like how to like exactly where the conversation is gonna go, or like that pattern recognition piece that we talked
Yeah.
about where like at this point, and I always think of this like when I find myself getting super anxious, and you taught me this is like and like ways that we help each other, but we don't even realize, right?
Yeah.
It's we say because like and I love Rylie does astrology readings, so and we consult with each other, and she says so many things that she's like, I don't even remember what I'm saying because you're just kind of channeling.
Mhm.
But how like when we're kind of so overwhelmed with like the performative piece or just like shifting and all of that, it's like we're all these little ants that are just like going about our day, just like trying to do things and get milk from the store and just drive here and there. So
Mhm.
when it's like we go so into like our blinders of our world and like the hustle and the grind, it's like coming out and offering that like reflector wisdom, right? It's like reflecting back. It's like what's actually happening and what are the things that
Mhm.
are important. It's like a helpful reframe when we feel like there's that constant like shifting back and forth for like what is needed for the time. Are there instances that you felt where like you're like, wow, I don't actually have to be in a moment where I feel like I have to shift right now?
Mhm. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's part of like what reflectors probably need to work on is learning how to not always be matching the energy around, and like bring their own energy into the situation, and bring that authenticity that comes with bringing our own energy. I It's a conscious thing. I have to consciously be aware of, oh, right now I'm kind of performing what's expected of me again. Do I need to do that? I think there's a piece of it that comes from it's safer to perform to expectations. You'll get your social acceptance, you'll blend in, everyone will think you're normal.
Right.
But like at the end of the day, that like just chips away at you. So it's definitely like a conscious effort to be aware of when it's happening, and know, there's possibly an extent that you may need to like bring out a certain self, but you don't need to hide away all the other parts of you just because you're being one piece of you. Um, and so I'm doing this a lot more at work. I'm a teacher. I teach third grade, and uh, the school environment is just such a different environment than other parts of my life that sometimes it feels completely disjointed. Um, but when I'm feeling that way, I know that I'm just like tearing myself apart, and it feels so inauthentic to the point that it makes me like hate being in that environment and like get burnt out really easily. So there's a conscious effort of how can I bring me into this environment, and how can I bring who I am into this environment and allow those parts of myself and accept any judgment or backlash that I get, in an appropriate way, um, to this new environment, instead of totally shifting and being what like a teacher looks like, or like a typical coworker. Like I'm not that person, so why perform that person?
Yes, I love that. I know you're talking about like the way that you'll be able to like slowly infuse more of yourself like into
Mhm.
the classroom. And I feel like the decor alone like helps so much with
Oh
that.
yeah.
Like, set up your classroom, but even it's like nice just to be able to remind yourself like, okay, I know that I'm doing this, like, I'm turning this corner, like, I feel really burnt out. So, like, how can I course correct or put
Mhm.
yourself back in a place of empowerment versus, like, feeling so stressed? And that was, like, it leads me to my next question was, does that, like, trying to compartmentalize all those different aspects of you, is the way that you can tell or the telltale sign burnout for you of, like, how you know that you've been doing it too much?
Yeah, burnout or even, if I leave an area and I'm just completely drained and exhausted, I know that I was masking and performing the whole time. And I've had like situations where, it's not like I'm with a negative group of people. I'm not with people that are bringing me down. I'm not around people who are draining people, but because I feel the pressure to put myself in the box that I think that they want me in, I get drained. And then
Yeah.
I leave that situation. I'm like, I need a nap.
Right.
Like,
Right, and are you, like, a pro napper throughout, like, the day now? Like, do you take naps? Like, I feel like especially during the school year, like, I was always
yeah.
like yeah.
Yeah, I am nap queen. If I could take a nap every day between the hours of like 1 and 4 p.m., I would.
Yeah.
But
I love that. I feel like it's restorative to the soul, especially for, like, a mental health, like, reset. If you're like, "Okay, this day is ass, like, maybe if I just take a nap, it'll feel a
yeah.
little better."
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's every once in a while you get into that coma nap where you
Yeah.
wake up feeling like
Yes.
you're in a different universe, but
Like, where am
most
I
of the
right
time
now?
it's restorative.
Yes. And do you find that when you, like, have the summer off that it happens less because you're able to be, like, around friends more and, like, out of that like, is it like because I know in your incarnation crosser, you have, like, elements of, like, extremes or, like but you also have
Mhm.
some sort of, like, left facing arrows, which is a fancy way to say, like, there's certain things that you do in a very particular way, but other times you're just, like, kind of
Yeah.
throw caution to the wind and just, like, do things in an
Yeah.
extremist way.
Yeah, it does feel like I've totally shifted into feral mode
Yes.
where during the school year, having like that structure and routine is really helpful for me. And I think it's helpful for reflectors in general to have like a loose structure. Now, there's parts of the day that I wish were a little bit more flexible because as a reflector, my energy just waxes and wanes so much and it's unpredictable. I never really know when I'm going to have a burst of energy and motivation and when I'm just going to be completely exhausted. But outside of that, having like a structure and routine helps kind of keep me like on my health, like on top of my health and making sure I'm doing like things that are restorative for me because I know that there's 8 hours out of the day that I can't. So I need to set aside time that I can versus now in the summer, there's no structure, there's no routine. And I'm realizing I'm actually like my eating habits have gotten worse, my sleeping
Right.
habits have gotten worse. Like there's no exercise habits, like because I don't have the structure to kind of keep me like organized and on top of things.
Yes, yes, and it makes so much sense because it's, like, for you having, like, all open centers, but the open, like, motivational center, the ego
Mhm.
center, it's like you need someone else to influence structure on you to be able to have said structure, or else it's kinda like,
Yes.
"Oh, it could flow," but I think that's, like, the blessing and a curse of a capitalistic society is that we're
Yeah.
taught to, like it's like we're constantly and I know this for myself, like, I do this, all day long or talk about human design all day long, but I'm still trying to find out, like, what is that ideal sort of
Mhm.
structure, and I think too it's like part of like the acceptance of it is like more than half the battle, and like
Yeah.
knowing too that like it's impossible for humans to feel 100% okay 100% of the time. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't teach us anything, you know? So it's like that hard kind of struggle. And it reminded me to ask you as well when you were saying burnout and being like so open and like being around people and structure and all that. I think people would assume that you would be more of an introvert by nature,
Mhm.
but I don't see you as that like the case at all. I feel like every
Mhm.
time like I always see you somewhere with a new group of friends or you're doing karaoke or we'll be TikToking at 1:30 in the morning. Kind of like you're just always doing something. So
Yeah.
how do you kind of manage that? Like how does that kind of look for you with like burnout is kind of
Mhm.
more so aligned with one area, but like social settings or social
Mhm.
outings give you like more life, or what is that kind of nuance for you?
Yeah, I think In situations where I am able to really be myself and feel authentic, I could keep going all day. So if I'm like on a hike with some friends that, I can really just like let loose and be me with, I could be out there all day playing around and having fun and not feel stressed or anxious or burnt out. So I think part of it is who I surround myself with. And I've really, I would say over the past like 4 years, have really intentionally built groups around myself in which I can be myself. Because there were a lot of people in my life before that, I felt like I had to cut myself into digestible pieces for. And it was really exhausting. And I was a lot more introverted when I was doing that. Um, but I mean, I don't know if all reflectors would agree with this, but I almost feel like because I'm so open, sometimes the energy that other people have helps kind of give me energy.
Right.
Other people are like excited and energetic and ready to go, then I'm excited and energetic and ready to go. So sometimes being around other people actually makes me more motivated, again, if it's the right people. I mean, there's times that I like have been packing for a trip and have invited someone over just to be with me while I'm doing that, which, a little bit of an ADHD tendency there too. But that body doubling is so, so helpful, I think, for reflectors to just kind of have somebody else there, not even necessarily doing anything, but just to kind of like give you the energy and motivation that we need.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's so important is like knowing how to distinguish between like, okay, I know that I'm gonna need to borrow somebody's energy for this. Like, how can I like, okay, I know Brenna like is a sacral manifesting generator. Like, how do I borrow her sacral energy for like this project versus like, okay, I need the person that has a defined ego like motivation center. I need
Right.
them to be my workout buddy or like having people for different, which I think is very much like your friendships is like you have people who are like for different areas of your
Mhm.
life, but it's like the like collection of friends that like,
Yes.
but everyone has like I feel like the same kind of which I was gonna ask you about too, like values. I feel like
Yeah.
that's where it's like something that because we talked about like the struggles, but maybe like the benefits of that.
Mhm.
You're also a left angle incarnation cross in human design, which I wanted to say is more of like you need other people to like carry out your life's purpose, whereas a right angle person, and I want to look at definition in relation to this because I don't know if they have to do with like if there's any reflectors that are right angle people, I'd be
Mhm.
curious to know, but they're more like self-motivated to where it's like I'm a right angle cross. So it's like I'm interested in human design. Therefore, I'm gonna seek out like these kinds of conversations.
Mhm.
But sometimes like I have like very much ADHD tendencies where like someone's going like ad nauseum about us. For me, it feels ad nauseum. For them, it probably feels like nothing. But if it's like a subject I either don't understand or it's just like not of particular interest for me. Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like an asshole thing to say, but it's like I feel like I just have learned how to like curate my surroundings so that like
Mhm.
I don't end up in conversations like that as much.
Right.
Usually it's like being too nice where you're like, okay, like you'll just keep letting the person talk because you also don't want to make them feel bad. But I'm like, I can feel my energy tank like
Mhm.
um, but yeah, so to go back to values, like, do you feel like, and then we'll kind of pivot into like the benefits of being a reflector and what you love about being a reflector. But I wanted to touch on like the values piece. And if you feel like there are core values that you have that almost help give you a sense of like, almost like an anchor point to kind of like hold on to, or what values kind of look like for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something, I'm glad you brought up because I think finding that sense of identity really comes down to knowing your values and knowing what's important to you, and ironically, I saw an Instagram post about this, like, 3 days ago. I wish I had saved it. I did not. But it was really just talking about that concept. So when you know what your values are and what is important to you, there's other things in your life that are always going to change, but you can come back to those values. So for me, I know that community is a big value for me, which means that I do want a group of people around me who feel like a community, who feel like a support group, that I'm there for them and they're there for me and we're all just helping each other out. So throughout my life, looking back, I can see how community was always important to me. But I just like didn't know how to execute that and find a community until more recently. Um, I know that caregiving is important to me and always has been. Again, this is part of that identity is kind of like looking back throughout your life and seeing what themes are prevalent the whole time. Um, Throughout all the other things that shift and change, there's always going to be some veins of like consistency. So caregiving for me, I'm a teacher. Obviously, I've worked in daycares. I wanted to be a psychologist and a counselor, which is a caregiving. I have pets. And then if I look back to my childhood, I was always trying to like save baby animals and care for them and keep things alive that probably weren't like other people thought I was insane, but I wanted to try. Um,
Love.
yeah, speaking of, there's the cat. But that's one of those values that I know, despite anything else, that's something that's consistent within myself. There's some other ones, just like generosity and giving to others, which kind of goes along with caregiving. But I think what's really important for reflectors and everyone in general, but especially reflectors to do is to make a list of what we value and things that have been consistent in our life, and maybe even jot down some notes about like how that's played out from childhood on, just so that we can go back to that when we feel like a little untethered or we're like, who am I again? And then we have this list we can pull out and we're like, oh yeah, I am caregiving and I am empathetic and I am, all of these things that I value.
Love that. That's so
Mhm.
helpful. And do you think like and knowing Bobby also like that's also helpful for projectors to do?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that's such a good tip. Like even just as a reminder for myself to be like when I also feel like the not self theme, right? Because yours is like that
Hmm.
deflated balloon feeling.
Hmm.
Um, but also I know we've talked about like frustration or that like sense of like overwhelm, which is mine. It's like, okay, like where am I misaligned with what my actual values
Right.
are? And especially as someone who's going through like a Saturn return in the first house, like I'm very much struggling with like, okay, but who am I? Like as soon as I feel like I know something, as quick as like it's out the door, like I don't know it, like I don't even know what's happening anymore. It feels like um, so I feel like you even just saying that is a
Yeah.
helpful reminder for me also. So thank
Yeah.
you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can feel that way. I mean, I know growing up, I was perceived by 2 Taurus parents who are very fixed, as someone who changed my mind a lot, and that was presented as this negative thing that I was always changing my mind and I could never stick with something. And again, we could say that that's some ADHD tendency as well.
Right.
Um, but part of being a reflector, I think, is that trial and error. And, everything looks so shiny and cool to us. There's so much potential. There's so many things that we're interested in. And we don't know if it's really a good fit for us until we really try it out. Um, and it can be so scary in a world that makes you feel like crap for changing your mind and for trying stuff out. So I think it's also important just for, again, for everyone, but especially reflectors to be okay with those changes. And, you're going to change your mind. Maybe you wanted to be an artist and now you're a teacher, just like I was. So,
Right, it's so funny you, like, read my mind because I was just gonna ask, like, how do you find, like what are, like, healthy coping skills for you in being in, like, a traditional like, more of a traditional career path
yeah.
right now? Like, how do you help yourself, like, navigate that and, like, knowing, like, "Okay, well, we do exist in a capitalist society, like, I need
Mhm.
money to live and do the fun things that I'm talking about that help me allow the funds to be able to
Yeah.
change my mind and do different things." Like, what has been, like, a tool some tools that you've used?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think part of it is finding a career that is flexible enough that gives you constant change. So yes, I'm a teacher and for those 9 months throughout the year I have the same class every day in elementary school. But each day is different and there's always new lessons to teach. So there's like this constant change throughout the year. You can see the students grow and change throughout the year. Not saying all reflectors need to be teachers, but the concept of picking a career in which there is like flexibility and change throughout the year, I think is really important, rather than, you go to your desk job every day and you sit down at the same computer in the same office and do the same thing every day in and day out. It's just going to be an absolute nightmare for a reflector. And then also, fortunately, as a teacher, I get my summers off, so I get that time to recharge. But it is hard knowing that you have to pick one thing. I think that was the hardest thing for me, is like narrowing down, because I tend to outward spiral, and like pulling myself in and narrowing down to one thing and picking it and sticking with it. Um, but within sticking with it, I'm also aware that this is not potentially a sustainable career forever. And I'm allowing myself, even just having started teaching, to say it's okay if I'm looking for backup plans for the future. Like, this is my now, but it doesn't have to be forever. And allowing that openness for my future calms me down so much and makes me feel so much less trapped in what I'm doing. So again, that's kind of where like the changing is okay. You can pick something and you can stick with it for as long as it works for you. And then if you find something else that works better with where you're at, go for it.
Right. I love that. Yeah, and that's so nice too, because it's like listening to where we talk about where your strategy is to wait a full lunar cycle.
Mhm.
So it's like we were talking about how almost more so for like a year, you'll like start like stoking the fires is like what I
Mhm.
kind of like of something before you really make a decision like, okay, yeah, like I'm ready to do this now. But I feel like for you it's like nice because you get that kind of like that daily dopamine hit of like exploring other options, but like also knowing that you're not forcing yourself to commit to something
Yeah.
prematurely, where is definitely like a trait of like manifesting generators, especially like myself. It's like I need to get rid of it, and then like it just needs to be gone. It's like so overwhelming, or we really lean into that, and then it's like, oh, but like I didn't have a backup plan, or it's like I made it that much harder for myself because I was trying to like outsmart the lesson of not waiting instead of just like
Mhm.
kind of centering myself a little bit. It's like that anxious reaction.
Yeah.
It's also an open root center trait too. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. But what are some other like beneficial things that you love about being a reflector?
One thing I love, and you've brought this to my attention several times, which is really cool, is I think reflectors are just so like aware of what's going on around us, and so open to just whimsy and like any little detail that is just fascinating to us. Um, and so I think it's really cool, like like you said, you'll see something and now you start thinking, oh, Riley would think that's really cool.
Yes.
Like, it could be like a random leaf on the ground, or like a certain cloud in the sky. It doesn't have to be anything big. I
Yes.
think reflectors are really good at like finding joy in the little things. I think there's almost like a childlike wonder that comes with being so open to everything. If you think of like how kids are born into this world, there is like this openness and um all this potential in a child. And I think reflectors kind of carry that on with them throughout their life, which is really, really cool and interesting, and it makes us so like unique in a special way.
Yes, I love yeah, definitely that's in actually the definitive book of human design is that reflectors often tend, and when you said not all reflectors should be teachers, but reflectors usually choose career paths where like children are around or just find themselves in like maybe they like they're say they're in school, like they're the nannies or like the babysitters, like that's
Mhm.
their job outside, or like a lifeguard or like a camp counselor, like they'll do things like that also, which I think is really
Yeah.
cool because like you can like, you know how to talk to them because you kind of you are them at the same time, like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
lose
Yeah,
that.
it's like it's part of that reflector like understanding. And um I mean, I feel like we can just feel exactly what it's like to be someone else and
Yes.
have this like deep understanding of someone else's experience, even if we've not necessarily experienced it. I mean, we can pull from like something that was just a small amount related to what someone's going through, and like feel what they're going through. um which I think might be that open G center as well. You can correct me on that. You know more about it than I do.
Yeah.
But it's this ability to really empathize and put ourselves in other people's shoes and see and understand them in a way that other people might not be able to.
I love that. Yeah, it's like pointing out like the whimsy, which is really
Mhm.
nice, or just special parts. And I think that's like something that it's like just being, because if we had like the perfect world, right? Like as a reflector, you would sit basically at like the center of the community, and then people would be able to like come in and out and like consult with you throughout the day. Like leading to like, but when you like say wanted to take a nap from like your 1 to 4, you could put a sign in the door that's like come back later, or
Yeah.
when the doors open, it's like office hours, right? Like the doors
Mhm.
open, come in, the doors close, like I'm busy doing something else. And it's nice because when you are like the seer, in that way, the projectors are also called that, but I feel like they're also more, it's accurate to use it for reflectors, where like you, it reminds me of, I kept getting the visual of like That's So Raven, when like she has
Mhm,
that like
mhm.
snapshot. It's like that's how quick it is. Like someone could say one thing, or they just
Yeah.
come into your aura, and like you've got the read. It's like that psychic ability where it's like being able to sense it is like the open emotional and crown center, but then and spleen a little bit too, but then like you embodying it or like feeling it momentarily is definitely that open G center,
Yeah.
where it's okay, like now, because that open G center is always searching for like something to feel um like secure about, from a place of like this is who I am. So I think that's where like the writing down your values is like a helpful tool. Like, oh, I get to be anyone, or I get to play with identity, but I also, my values are like, I'm always going to be a caregiver. Like I'm always going to have
Yeah.
this childlike innocence or like
Mhm.
whimsical nature. So like that can be, those can be your stabilizing factors. It doesn't have to be like, I'm a teacher, like I am this, I am that.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be like labels, as if, that a capitalistic society
Yes.
puts to put on
Yeah.
ourselves.
Right.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other
Um,
tips or things that you wanted to share before, or resources?
so I
Yeah.
definitely wanted to talk about boundaries as a reflector,
Yes.
especially when our sense of self can feel so like wonky.
Yeah.
Boundaries can be really challenging because one, we're understanding and feeling how the other person feels. So sometimes putting a boundary and knowing that it could hurt someone like that alone can be really challenging. Um, but sometimes we don't even know what our own boundaries are. So therefore, how can we enforce them with
Right.
others? So again, kind of like that list of values, I think it's really important for reflectors to write down some boundaries in different situations. So what kind of boundaries they have at work, what kind of boundaries they have with families, with friends, at home, even boundaries with ourselves. I think sometimes part of that lack of structure is that we're not putting proper boundaries on ourselves and our time and what we want to do. Um, and it really starts at home. What are you doing for yourself? And then it echoes outward. um, so I think knowing what our boundaries are and then practicing enforcing them in safe areas, and then also being okay with if we enforce a boundary and someone reacts negatively and is not okay with our boundary and doesn't respect it, that we are allowed to remove ourselves from that situation or that relationship, and it doesn't reflect badly on us. It doesn't mean like we weren't a good friend or we didn't try. It just means that we're taking care of ourselves, which I think reflectors can struggle with.
Oh, definitely. I think because you, especially with that coupled piece of like, because when somebody said, like going back to like your parents telling you that you change your mind too much,
Mhm.
like you being able to see into them and knowing exactly how they felt when they said that, like that they're so sure that they're correct. And that's
Mhm.
and that like you start to question, like, no, this is just what helps me be more me, is that I allow myself to change my mind. So it's like you kind of having to like untie that knot
Yeah.
of like what that is, in an effort to keep your values like sacred, and then your boundaries, as an aside to that. So I
Yeah.
love that. So
Yeah. It's kind of
writing
like the
down
world gaslights us and we have to
yeah,
ungaslight ourselves.
right, right. And I feel like because you guys have it like tenfold, you're like, because you are so open and you can't
Mhm.
imagine like putting those judgments so heavily on
Yeah.
other people or limitations, that it's like confusing to be like, where is there another reflector? So it's like trying to find other reflectors that
Yeah.
you see that like embody that. And then I know we were talking about the ones that you can find online can be a little too far into
Mhm.
like a direction that almost doesn't even make sense anymore, where
Yeah.
it's like unrelatable. So I think that like being basically putting the power back into your own hands is exactly right. Like with
Yes.
writing your values and your boundaries are like so.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a tendency, and I know I used to do this all the time. And I think again, this is something that is common, I think, for women in general, but then especially if you're also a reflector, is I was seeking outside validation so heavily that I just let other people completely define me. And it felt like I couldn't see myself unless I was looking at myself through somebody else's eyes. So taking a step back to really see yourself how and think about how you want to be seen for yourself, not for anyone else, but like how do you want to see yourself? And then embodying those traits that you admire and that you want to have, but are also true to you, is so important because otherwise we can just totally get lost in other people and kind of like letting other people define us and validate us and then we lose all of our own personal power.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important side note too, because like you still have like gates in your chart. So it's not like you don't have any, like, it's not like you're totally open where you have no sense of identity.
Yeah.
You still know some things about like yourself, where
Yeah.
people are like, wait, is everything that I ever thought a lie? Which like isn't, I don't want people to get freaked out by that either.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And like I definitely can feel that way sometimes. I mean, in the past couple years through my Saturn return, I went through some big personal changes and there was a good couple months where I just felt like everything in my life was a lie and I didn't know myself. And it wasn't until I really thought about who I am at my core and what has stayed consistent throughout my life and those values that I was able to go, oh, okay, well, this kind of is always how it's been. It's just I let the world define me and tell me who I was. And I tried to meet that instead of being my authentic self.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think again, it's like knowing how to identify it for yourself so like you know how to
Yeah.
handle it is super important.
Yes.
Be like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what it is. That's so good. Well, anything else that you want to share? Any like takeaways? I know we have some good ones with the values
Yeah.
and the boundaries. I'm also going to do that. The values ones
Yeah.
today, which I think is very helpful.
Yeah. Um, The only other thing I had written down is, as a reflector, I think it's important to take some time to be single,
Yes.
because of that validation piece and wanting to. It's so easy to like jump into a relationship and then use that other person as what defines you. But even taking like 6 months to just like be totally single and not talk to anyone and just like feel your own self and your own body and your own emotions and like understand what makes you tick, instead of waiting for someone else to understand and see you in that way, is so important for reflectors.
Yeah, I love that. And it goes back to exactly what you said about like you feel like you could only see yourself through other people, but
Mhm.
it's just because like you were probably being so constantly defined by
Yeah.
others that it's like in the literal and metaphorical sense of the word, that
Mhm.
it's like, oh, now I'm actually forced to like there's no one else that's kind of clouding my vision or my judgment or my
Mhm.
decisions right now. So like
Yeah.
how do I and that's really how you get to the values piece too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And even for extroverted reflectors like me, it's still important to come back and like take that time to be in your own little comfort nest and
Yes.
just like feel yourself again.
Yes. Yes, I'm gonna actually look up the reflector piece in relationships in the book because I want to read it. But this is actually a good time for me to ask you the question. How do you like set up good like boundaries with living with somebody? Because you do have roommates, so it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
like helpful maybe for reflectors that are in partnership or
Mhm.
just live with somebody. Like, what are good like ways that you kind of like set boundaries for like making sure you get that alone time when you are home?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. I was so scared to get a roommate because I had been living on my own for about a year and a half. And I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to enforce my boundaries just because historically I hadn't been able to. But that time alone really gave me some time to think about like, what is it that I need? And it gave me time to see myself fully. So that when I began even just discussions with the person who now lives with me, I told them some of my boundaries from the get-go. I think there's a tendency to not want to say our boundaries and hope that someone doesn't cross them, and then you have to bring them up once it's crossed, which makes emotions a little bit higher and makes the situation a little feel like a little bit more pressured. But knowing what those boundaries are by making that list and then bringing it to the person before any other discussion even happens, and just saying, I need alone time. There's going to be times that I can't have conversations. If that happens, I just need time, and then I'll let you know when I am able to talk. Because as extroverted as I am when I come home, even with a roommate, there's times where I'm like, okay, I'm done talking for the day. So knowing what those boundaries are by, taking a good look inward and writing them down, and then letting the other person know what they are off the bat. Um, don't think you can wait it out. Don't think it'll all be okay. It's famous last words.
Right.
Be upfront about your boundaries and be clear about them. And then also reinforce them if it does come up. So, I did set a boundary that there's going to be times I can't communicate. And then when someone's trying to talk to me, when I can't communicate, that's up to me to then enforce the boundary again and say, oh, wait, right now, not a good time.
Yes, I
Mhm.
love that. Yeah, and I think it's important, like, to know because I'm always like, well, if I've set a boundary, then like that's just the rule. Like they're gonna follow it all the time, and
Right.
it's we don't want to have to like repeat ourselves, but
Yeah.
we do. I feel like it's a good like rule of three. It's like
Mhm.
giving people like the chance because it's really just teaching a new pattern, and I think knowing
Mhm.
ultimately that the other person isn't, intentionally being
Yeah.
malicious is like the key too.
Right.
There's sometimes when there's people are, but that's a different
Yeah.
story.
Right. Yeah, that's a totally different scenario.
Exactly. I could go on that alone. Um, but yeah, so let me read you the Reflector relationships page because I was thinking about this anyway, just like in our previous conversation or like when we were
Mhm.
prepping, but I think it'd be helpful for all reflectors listening or just anyone who knows a reflector. But this is from the definitive book of human design. So I have it linked in the show notes for those who are interested on page 140 and 141. But the extreme openness of reflectors can put them at the mercy of their partner's definition, making it easy for an element of narcissism to enter the relationship. Reflectors mirror and magnify their partner's definition back to them, so what the other person may see and may unwittingly fall in love with is their own reflection, not the reflector. That makes so much sense.
Mhm.
People who don't like themselves often fall in love with themselves or often fall in love with themselves through their own reflection and through somebody else. This process of self-discovery is facilitated by the reflector's openness. Without understanding personal authenticity and clear boundaries on the part of both partners, reflectors' deep-seated fears of remaining invisible, of not being seen for who they really are, may well be realized. When reflectors are constantly rushed into decisions or are not secure in their decision-making process, they run the risk of becoming dependent on those who have a reliable personal authority. They then allow their partners to make decisions for them to determine their mode of sexual expression, their eating and sleeping habits, their occupation, where they live, their place in the family. Reflectors can also be at the mercy of people around them, and if they allow themselves to be dominated by not self-oriented people, they will amplify that distortion in their energy field and feel deeply disappointed by their own experience of life. There are no moment to moment rules for a reflector to follow, only the authority of waiting a lunar cycle so that they can be clear when making a decision. Such a process is foreign to the other types, and when not understood, it can bring discord into the relationship and suffering to the reflector. Reflectors that allow themselves to be rushed and pressured are likely to have health problems later in life. That's really interesting.
Mhm.
For the reflector, a relationship is of greatest value when it's fertile and productive, and most reflectors love having children around them as they bring an innocent and consistent connection to the reflector's designs. That's what we were talking about
Mhm.
before. They enjoy relating with and reflecting people who share their awe and wonder for life, and it is often difficult for reflectors to cut the apron strings when it comes time to let their children go. Like, that's really interesting, and it was
Yeah.
honestly just a good summary of, like, also the like, the validation of everything you just said. I think you like there
Yeah.
was a bullet point in like every aspect of what we talked about that was in each of the 4 paragraphs.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so important that like waiting a lunar cycle thing, especially in like romantic relationships. Speaking to my past, I just rushed into every relationship and didn't even really know the person, but just wanted them to see me and want me so badly that I just went for it. And they were all disastrous,
Yeah.
which is the typical storyline there. But like when you know yourself and you know what you want, you know what your boundaries are, it's so much easier to take the time to get to know someone and make sure that they align with your values, and with what feels authentic to you and good for you. Then you're not rushing in because you already have an idea of what you want and you can say, oh, this person matches it or they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think too, to add on to that with the waiting a lunar cycle, it's like you also don't because it's a month, right? Is like a full 28-day cycle where like it can just be a piece of the puzzle. Like it could be
Yeah.
like, okay, this month's lunar cycle decision was that okay, like I'll get to know this person a little bit more, or I'll go on a date with this person. Then the next month is like, do I want to keep seeing them
Yeah.
consistently? And the next one is like, do I want to see this person exclusively? Like it doesn't always have to be like, okay, 4 months, like I have to make a decision about this like
Mhm.
relationship because of those decisions are big decisions for you. It's like nobody else can judge like
Right.
the impact that those decisions have, where it's like for the sacral authorities, right? Like Mandy and I were like, okay, 2 weeks, like, yep, we got it. Like that was, and that worked for us.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
also like what I feel like society pushes as like the or when like or it's like love at first sight, like that's
Mhm.
not necessarily the case for you guys. And it's like again, like to reiterate what the book says, it's like allowing yourself like or allowing people allowing you the grace to also take your divine timing for
Mhm. Yes. Right.
like knowing that you know and what you're telling them is fact. There's no like hidden fluff behind what you're saying.
Mhm.
There's no alternative meaning. It's like what you say is like what you truly feel. And I think that's also like the whole authenticity piece, right? That
Mhm.
like can people sometimes feel like, oh, but like they don't mean that. So they could
Yeah.
just, but it's like, no, what I'm saying is true.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, I think society really does make it seem like you should just fall in love with people instantly, and then on top of that, add being queer and being
Yes.
a AFAB person who dates AFAB people. There's also that layer of, oh, lesbian relationships. You meet, you have your first date, and you move in together.
Right.
That's
Right.
like rushing. That is almost expected. Um, and it's people kind of look at you funny when you say you need to take the time to get to know someone.
Yes.
But again, that's part of that. That's your boundary then. Your boundary is I need to get to know someone before I engage in a romantic relationship with them. And then your job as the reflector is to stay true to that boundary and stay in your power and do what feels right for you.
I love that. And I think it's good. It's been like nice to see you going through the like the flexing of that muscle, like the reflector
Mhm.
muscle to like as it's working and setting your boundaries. And I think just being able to like, and we've talked about like, cause now it's been 2 years we've known each other or like
Yeah, I think
2 years.
close to, yeah.
Yeah, 2021.
Yes, I think so, right?
Oh, I can look. I think it's 2 years. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm
It
pretty
feels
sure.
like longer.
I know. Can you actually? It's only been one because I was in my apartment in South Amboy.
Oh
In
my gosh,
and
right,
I'm like, this is
yeah.
like that's so crazy to think that. And I think just a testament to like how like yes, it seems like waiting a lunar cycle is so long, but like how far you've come just in this last year.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was like,
yeah.
I have to think of where was I sitting when I did your reading and I was out my kitchen
Yeah.
island.
I know, it feels like the past year has definitely been more than a year, but
Yes. Yes. And
yeah,
it's like the whole question of like, excuse me, is time going faster? Like we
right.
can go down that whole rabbit hole too.
Time isn't real.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It's like the spiral. But I'd be interested to see because I was actually just talking about this yesterday where there's supposed to be a in 2027 because I got the question on TikTok yesterday, do people's incarnation crosses change with time? So if
Mhm.
like say two people have November 1st birthday is a person that's born November 1st, 2010, different incarnation cross from someone who's born in
Oh.
like 1989? And the answer generally is no. However, come 2027, there's like 1 to 4 incarnation crosses that are supposed to change, but like there's no addendum to like what is supposed to happen with those people at 2027. And Ra Uru Hu, like the founder of human design, died like I think about 10 years ago now.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, okay, now what? I mean, his co-author Linda Blundell, I think is her name, Blunell, is still alive. So I'm like, hopefully, like she knows, but I'm like, I
Yeah.
want to know more about this. Because that, yeah, but we'll see. But for most
Yeah.
of these still they'll stay the same. Our energy types will stay the same, which basically is like if you follow your energy type strategy and authority, all those other things just happen to fall into place. But
Mhm.
it's interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Paradigm shift. But thank you so much for joining me
Yeah.
today. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to like have this interview to send to people who are reflectors because like there's
Yeah.
full of like because you also have the gate of the gift of phraseology. So like verbiage that like they will need to hear from you as like us the
Mhm.
source of another reflector that I know that like I just couldn't hit the nail on the head like you
Mhm.
can obviously being a reflector and living the experience. But I know that you also offer astrology readings, as I mentioned earlier. So, and you are open right now to accepting new people to read
Yeah.
for since you have the summer off and the open availability to do that. Although you have given me readings and info all the time throughout, which I'm very thankful for. And I cannot like I'm not saying this obviously just because you're my friend. And we don't blow each other's like Rylie and I are not the type of people to just promote people for the sake of promoting people, but like she really has a true gift for this. So I'm gonna leave her Instagram in the show notes as well. So if you guys are interested in an affordable and amazingly in-depth astrology reading, please go to Rylie. And then I'll have all the show notes for all the other links that I always talk about again in the show notes. But thank you so much for having being on here today and for having this conversation with me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Of course. I'll see you soon.
All right. See you soon.